Our second scripture reading is from Genesis 18, verses 1 through 15. Listen now for the word of the Lord. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring you a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abram, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Some of you here remember Bert Newman. He died recently. He's been on my mind and heart. He was a member of our congregation for several decades. He served as a parish associate pastor to many people in the congregation. In my time, he helped us with 2 different staff retreats, helping with team building and people to get to know each other. And at each of those retreats, to kind of know the personalities of one another, he would have questions, and you'd stand on this side of the room if you were this kind of person, on the opposite side. So things like, if you're a horse, go to this corner. But if you're an eagle, go to that corner. If you're a night owl, go to this side of the room. If you're a morning person, go to that side of the room. If you're someone who likes to host the party, go to this end. If you're someone who likes to attend the party, go to that end. If Abraham had ever been part of one of Bert's staff retreats, he would have been on the side of the room that says, if you're the person who likes to host the party. I like to imagine that Sarah would likewise be in that category, but we don't really get her opinion about the matter. We just hear about what she does to prepare for these guests who have arrived. But you can see evidence of this trait of hospitality and hosting in our passage for today. Abraham encounters these 3 strangers, and he runs up to greet them, insistent that they come and rest in the shade by his tent. He offers them just a little water and a little bread. And that's nice, a respite in the heat of the day on their journey through the desert. But then you hear what Abraham actually does. He hollers up to Sarah, "Get out the iron skillet and make up some new cornbread." He doesn't just go to the pantry and pull out the trail mix and a granola bar. He starts to prepare filet mignon. What is promised as a snack becomes an all-day affair as the bread bakes and the meat is butchered and the sauces simmer. Gail was a very active member of our church. She knitted prayer shawls and she sang alto in the choir. She knew that our children had exceptionally large heads. And so each year for Christmas, she would sew larger than standard winter caps with matching mittens for them to wear. Her husband, George, was not a church person. Part of that was he didn't believe in God. Part of that was his own mobility. Part of it was his personality. But from time to time, Gail and George would invite me over to their house, a small modular home on the top of a hill in our town. It was a house crammed with mementos and other collected decor. But when I walked in, what hit me was always the scent of what was coming off of the stove. George was a fantastic cook. They'd invite me over for lunch, but I knew I needed to block at least 2 hours if we were going to have this visit together. There would be fresh bread, broiled beef, and all kinds of vegetables, root vegetables, sautéed and simmering. So you see, George and Gail were originally from Vermont, so their cooking style was a little different than what I had grown up with. But it was amazing the rush of flavor as you would cut into the carrot or the potato, the rutabaga or the turnip. And as we sat there around the table, we would hear stories of their life when they used to work for the Cabot Cheese Company in Vermont, or when they'd go skiing. They'd share harder stories, how they had lost an adult daughter years before. As our relationship developed, they lost a granddaughter to an early death as well. These were hard conversations and deep pains. They talk about their own bodies decaying, knee aches, AFib. Gail did most of the talking. George did some. His specialty was whisking my plate away from in front of me, refilling it at the stove, and plopping it back down between my knife and fork. I learned that every morning at 5 a.m., George took off to his part-time job at Dollywood, where he would arrive hours before the patrons to bake fresh-baked cookies that would be sold in the restaurant there that day. They called him the Cookie Man among all the work staff there at Dollywood. And as we got to know each other better, sometimes I'd come into the church, sometimes even on Sunday mornings to my desk, and there would be a baggie of fresh-baked cookies with a sticky note with just 2 words, from George. I don't know what George believed about God or salvation or Christian virtue, but I know that he and Gail embodied an Abrahamic kind of hospitality, a home of welcome, where time slowed down, where conversation grew deep, where love formed, where you thought that something might actually be possible that seemed impossible before ascending the wooden ramp to their front door. Now, I don't think it's Abraham and Sarah's hospitality that creates the opportunity for this impossible good news from God. God does not need a steak dinner and fresh baked bread to carry out God's promises. But the details provided here in how Abraham welcomes these strangers, they are instructive to all future generations who follow in the way of Abraham. It is a call to people, regardless of their suffering, their sorrow, their confusion, the mundane routines of their life, to welcome each person they meet as someone who could be the very messenger of God. Not to elicit a promise or a blessing, but to approach each encounter as one that could be the moment that changes your life forever. As the author of Hebrews reminds us in reference to this story, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels unawares. I remember as a teenager, each year our youth group would cook dinner for the Volunteer Ministry Center once each semester. We'd make the meal in the church kitchen and then load it up and deliver it to the steam tables there at the ministry center. serving those who'd gathered that night who didn't have a meal at home or a home to be in or a kitchen to prepare that meal in. Mary Wilson was always in charge of youth group on this night. She had 2 teenage boys who she was constantly trying to whip into shape. One of them became a Marine, if that gives you any indication into the personality of his mother. Mrs. Wilson had been in charge of food service for our school system, so she knew how to prepare a meal for a large group of people in a timely manner. But you better have your apron tied, your hairnet on tight, and be ready to follow instructions to a T. I remember one night we were making huge vats of macaroni and cheese. But it wasn't Kraft or Velveeta. It was mac and cheese from scratch, where you had to stir milk in a pan until it formed into a roux. It was hot, and we were sweating. And one of the teenagers cried out into the steam, "Why can't we just make Easy Mac?" At which point Mrs. Wilson ceased all activity and marched over holding up her spoon in her hand for emphasis. Because if the President of the United States came to eat dinner in your home, would you serve Easy Mac? If your favorite athlete came to have dinner with you, would you serve Easy Mac? When your mom fixes Thanksgiving dinner, does she make Easy Mac? This meal tells these men and women who we believe they are. And we believe they're children of God. And so they deserve our very best. This isn't just fixing a meal. This meal could change somebody's life. So stir those noodles so they don't burn on the bottom of the pot. From this hospitality, this extravagant welcome, we hear Abraham and Sarah receive this blessing. And Sarah can't hold back her laughter. She is too old for such things. It's a laughter mixed with grief and longing. But the response of the visitors, as they push back from the table and they drop their napkins on their plates, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? It hangs on the air before them at that tent, as it hung on the air in George and Gail's kitchen, as it hung on the air above the vats of mac and cheese with Mrs. Wilson. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Are you willing to step in faith into the impossible that might change your life, your community, history? The only response to such an audacious question as that is laughter. Because how could you possibly do such a thing? Sarah tries to hide it because she thinks it's disrespectful, but God gives her a wink. "Oh, yes, you did laugh." That's absolutely the response you should have, Sarah, to something that is this great of good news. It's unbelievable. Kent Harif, in his book Plain Song, tells the story of a young girl, Victoria, who becomes pregnant while a student in high school. Her father had abandoned the family. Her mother kicks her out. She goes to one of her high school teachers in hopes that she'll take her in. Maggie, the teacher, is not able to, but she promises to help Victoria find a place to stay. So Maggie goes to Raymond and Harold McFerrin, two brothers who live several miles outside of town on their farm. They're older, quiet, keep-to-themselves types. When Maggie first approaches them about taking in a 17-year-old girl, they are dumbfounded. In private, later, they discuss the request. Harold asks, "I know what I think. What do you think we should do with it?" We take her in, Raymond said. He spoke without hesitation, as though he'd only been waiting for his brother to start so they could have this out and settle it. Maybe she wouldn't be as much trouble, he said. I'm not talking about that yet, Harold said. He looked out into the gathering darkness. I'm talking about, why, look at us. Old men, alone, decrepit old bachelors out here in the country, crotchety and ignorant, lonesome, independent, set in our ways. How are you going to change at this age in life? I can't say, Raymond said, but I'm going to. That's what I know. They do it. It isn't easy. But slowly over time, they learn how to share conversation. They learn how to share a life. They take Victoria to buy a crib for the baby. When the baby's father returns unexpectedly and whisks Victoria away to Denver, the two men are heartbroken, but things fall apart again in Denver, and she comes back, and they take her in yet again. When Victoria goes into labor, 2 people are allowed in the delivery room with her. It's Harold, it's Raymond McFerrin. They stick with her, and she sticks with them. The book ends with a dinner party at their old farmhouse at the end of May. There's the dining room where the table had been pulled open and the leaves put in and the white tablecloth laid on. And afterward, the table had been laid with tall candles and with the old china the girl had discovered in the high shelves of the kitchen, the old dishes that had been unused for decades, that were chipped and faded, but still serviceable. Fictional Raymond echoes our ancestor, Sarah. He can't see how he could change to do something impossible. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to do the impossible. I may not believe in God, but I'll make cookies for the preacher and I'll have him over for 2-hour lunches several times a year. It may be too much work, but we'll make the mac and cheese from scratch. We may be 2 crusty old farmers, but we're going to learn how to raise a child. Abraham and I may be a barren old couple, but we've set the table, we've served the meal, we've got out the chipped china, we've laughed at the crazy news, we've wiped our tears with the tablecloth. The question hangs before them as they sit in dumbstruck silence. And the question hangs before us still as we sit in dumbstruck silence around our own tables in those moments of welcome when the great good news comes. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord?